So far in Third John, we've got two primary characters. Well, I guess a third would be a group. The first, of course, is John himself, the writer, and the second is Gaius, the guy John is writing to. Third would be the people from John's fellowship, is the church he was a part of, who had gone out, and Gaius had treated with generosity and hospitality and kindness and love. And now we're going to meet this fourth character named Diotrephes. This is in verse 9. John writes, I wrote to the church, but Diotrephes, who loves to be first, will not welcome us. Now, we don't know. I mean, there's a possibility that this letter that John refers to here, having written to the church, that Diotrephes somehow intercepted. I don't think he necessarily destroyed, but he refused to welcome John. Was that second John? We don't know. There's real possibility that there's a missing letter somehow that John is referring to here. Kind of a mystery. I don't think it changes the impact of what John has written here or in 2nd or 1st John. But okay, here's the point I want to make today has to do with Diotrephes. Diotrephes, I looked up, does the name Diotrephes mean anything? Well, because in New Testament times, names were, they had a higher value back then, right? Your name had a meaning. And most of the time, the meaning of that name was part of your destiny. Well, Diotrephes has to do with, as far as my research is, a lover of Jupiter. And that's not the planet. That would be the Roman god, the Greek god, Jupiter. Okay, so that gives us a little background, a little insight into probably his family of origin. And maybe his age, and the reason I say maybe his age is because he didn't have a name that reflected any kind of Christian roots, and partly that was because the church was still young. The influence of the Christian movement in the world was relatively young at the time he would have been born. I don't think he was necessarily an old guy, but I don't think he was a young guy. Now here's why, and forgive me for being so anal about Diotrephes. He had authority in the church, or else he wouldn't have been able to what's the word I want? It's almost like he dropped the hammer on John and said, no, you won't be welcomed here. Just a member of the church wouldn't have had that authority. Now, John indicates that Diotrephes somehow, whatever his position was, had some authority to make that kind of a statement. In the early church, it was rare. I can't find it anywhere that young men were put in that position. It was always the older, the elder, that was in that position. And so I think it's well within reason that Diotrephes would have been a man in his, at least the last third of his life. Okay, John lived into his 90s, but he was kind of an anomaly. The life expectancy of people in century 1 was not 90. It was quite some younger than that. So anyway, okay. So Diotrephes was not a young guy. He was an older guy. He had achieved authority in the church. I think it's reasonable to guess that his family background was in what we would today consider mythology, that the religious preference of his family of origin would not have been Christian, wouldn't have been Christ. It would have been other Greco-Roman gods and goddesses, and in particular, Jupiter. All right. But all of those things are probably, they're of interest to me. How valuable they are, I don't know. Here's the one thing that John makes sure, because he records them about Diotrephes, is that it's there in verse 9, Diotrephes who loves to be first. What do you think that means? Well, it could mean he's very competitive. He wants to win. And when people are hyper competitive, when they truly love to be first in a competitive sense, they tend to win at all costs. They tend to, now on the positive side is, these kinds of people completely apply themselves into refining and sharpening their skills so that they can win, so that the cost is the cost of preparation. On the dark side, the cost, winning at all cost, has to do with bend the rules, play as far outside the rules as you can get to gain every advantage you can. Those are, I'm just going to call them what I think they are. They're dangerous. They in business, they can put a business over the edge, because when you play at the edge, you widen the odds of going over the edge. Okay? Now, here's another thing about those people. They tend to regard other people as movable pieces in a puzzle for their advantage. They tend not to treat people as people. They treat them as things. And there's all kinds of shades of gray in this. So it isn't like everybody is horrible who fits in this category. But it is not hard for me to imagine, from what John has said, that Diotrephes was pretty competitive, who loves to be first. Now, specifically, what was he competitive about? Wasn't monopoly, wasn't athletics, it was position in the church, in the context of his relationship with other people in the family of God. Somebody who loves to be first in that way is very dangerous to the health of the family. And the reason is, I'm just going to go with my idea on Diotrephes. He loved to be first in the family, meaning nobody else could be first. So there's only one first. Everybody else is not first. He loved to be first. And from what John is saying, he didn't just emotionally love it. He strategically worked to make sure he had this position of first in the church. He loved to be first. What size do you think his ego was? My impression is big, real big. You've known people who love to be first. Now, there are people who they're gratified when they're first. There are people who deserve to be first because their wisdom, the way they conduct themselves, the investments they make in other people really do make them where we would want them to be first, right? I don't think that's the case with Diotrephes. And we have known people, I bet you have, whether it's in business or in athletics or some civic organization or even in a family, who love to be first, and they could not stand it when anybody else was first. Their job, they felt, was to stay first, and they would do that pretty much at any cost. One of the last things on their mind was developing anyone else. They had no care, no concern, no regard for the fact that everybody else in that organization, in that context, had value. The only value that those people had was to what degree they could help them, Diotrephes, stay in first place. There are ways that this first place thing gets recognized, gets executed on. I make the final decision. My vote counts more than yours. I know more than you know. And even if you know more than I know, you don't know enough more than I know to tip the scales. Oh, by the way, I've always been first place here. We don't need another first place. And if you're pushing for first place, then you need to push somewhere else. I believe that Diotrephes had, over time, I don't think, he didn't just show up first day and say, all right, folks, just let you know I'm going to be first place here. No, I think over time he achieved this position. And there's even a possibility that at the beginning he seemed to be qualified. He seemed smart. He seemed insightful. He seemed devoted. Well, see, in the church, and this is basically true of any organization, when a person comes in and they have kind of a high ceiling, a pretty tall capacity, it gets noticed, and they find themselves elevated to a position that reflects the ceiling of their capabilities. I think this would have been the case with Diotrephes in the church. I don't know what he was good at, but he was good at something, and probably not just something. He was good at a number of things. The thing he was best at, in my opinion, and this is just conjecture, I think he was best at figuring out how to take advantage of people and circumstances. I think he was best at manipulation. John says Diotrephes loves to be first. It is worth a whole episode looking at just that about Diotrephes, and then looking into our own hearts and lives and asking the question, how in love am I with being first? Man, that is one of the most probing, difficult, deep, accusatory, personal questions I ask myself. It's been a long time ago since I brought this up, but I'll mention it to you again. I've always wanted to be at the cool kids table. I've always wanted to be in the in crowd, and honestly, I've always wanted to be the best at what I do. I've wanted to be first. You see, here's the deal. I can't be first and Jesus be first. You can't be first and Jesus be first. There's only one first. So, I'll ask you the same penetrating question that I've asked myself. Are you like Diotrephes? Probably going to produce guilt in some of us. Let's come back next time, talk about, all right, if you find yourself being like Diotrephes, what should you do? What do you do about the Diotrephes complex? Talk about it next time on Soul Care with Stevie Boy.